think I have a new favorite model. Anthropic finally shipped Claude 3.7, named that way because 3.5 October edition kind of became 3.6. Naming's hard, they even say the same, but I've been using this model all day for a bunch of real tasks, and I'm, to be frank, blown away. I think they can finally justify the absurd cost, which is more absurd than ever. It's 3 times more expensive than O3 Mini, and it's comparable performance a lot of the time. But for code stuff in particular, this is the best model ever made. So if you're a dev, you definitely want to watch this one. There's a lot going on in this release. It's not just a new update to Claude 3.5. It has 2 modes now, one of which is the thinking mode. So it actually has thinking, and it's weird. It's not seemingly hiding things the way OpenAI's thinking does, but it's weird. We'll look into it in just a bit. It doesn't switch languages the way other models supposedly do, but it does switch languages in weird ways. It's fun. But they also introduced Claude Code, which is a new CLI for working with your code base through Claude directly. It's very strange to see them competing with like Cursor in that way, but it's pretty cool, and I've been impressed overall. You'll see me going deep on that, adding an actual feature to my code base near the end of this video, so make sure you stick through for that. All of this said, 3.7 is as expensive as 3.5, which means it costs a lot of money, which means I should cut to a sponsor right now. But instead of doing that, I'm just going to tell you, if you can, sign up for T3 Chat. We already have Claude 3.7 set up, and if you want to use it there, it's only $8 a month. Pretty hard to beat. Give it a shot if you can. Anyways, let's talk about Claude, the first hybrid reasoning model on the market. This is an important detail. They do call out that the thinking is visible to the user, which is awesome. It's very transparent. I don't know if they're doing the weird message filtering thing that OpenAI is doing. It doesn't seem like it, though, because the text is very much direct what it seems like it's doing with its reasoning. I'll show you some examples in a moment. Considering the fact this model was already the best at code, it's pretty nuts that it's advancing. And I'm not the only one saying it was the best at code. Funny enough, OpenAI published a benchmark a couple weeks ago, actually a week ago. God, time flies in this world. In their new test called SWE Lancer, which showed how much money out of $1 million pool of random tasks from Upwork, I think. It's an interesting benchmark. I talked about it in the Grok video. It's, Upwork. So they found $1 million of actual tasks from Upwork, and the test and the benchmark is seeing how much of that money could have been earned by the model instead of a human. It's not like just one category, it's a bunch of them, which means it's a decently thorough test of the different variety of tasks that a model can do. This test was pretty damning for OpenAI. I'm still amazed they published it, but when you look at the numbers here, application logic problems, GPT-4o solved 8%, O1 solved 16%, Claude 3.5, not 3.7, 3.5 solved 24%. And for server-side logic, GPT-4o and O1 were both under 25%, Sonnet was over 40. So just like for a gut idea feel of how far ahead Sonnet was, this was before they even had reasoning in the model. This was just a standard autocomplete LLM, and they were still completing tasks even the best thinking models couldn't complete. I thought OpenAI published this benchmark because they expected to go way above it with some new release, but that release still hasn't happened. And my guess is once that gets run on 3.7, we're going to see even crazier numbers because they were already in the lead. And I can say, having used this model all day, 3.7 is a substantial jump. It is significantly better than I expected. I mentioned before, Claude Code, we'll have a whole deep dive of that near the end because it's a very different thing, but I want to focus on the model and the benchmarks first and foremost, because the benchmarks are looking kind of insane. There was a very tight race between existing options. The one thing I do think is worth noting is the price difference here, where O1 is insanely expensive, but O3 Mini High isn't. O3 Mini High is actually a very reasonably priced model. If we look at the pricing here, O3 Mini is $1.10 per million tokens in, $4.40 per million out. It's a thinking model, which means it uses more output tokens than most do, but it is so much cheaper that's fine, especially when compared to O1, which is 15 per mil in and 60 per million out. Obviously, that's all garbage compared to Gemini, and most of these prices are in existence now because DeepSeek shook up the market as hard as they did, but Claude is still $3 in, $15 out. In practice, that means it's more than 3x the price of O3 Mini. It's kind of insane how much more expensive Sonnet is, but when they were both around the same level, that was weird because Claude was roughly the same level as O3 Mini. Also, this is a weird chart now that I'm looking at it. O3 Mini actually was better than Claude, but they organized it this way so it looks like Claude was at the top. But everything here is higher than Claude other than O1, funny enough. R1 and O3 Mini both beat it, but then 3.7 comes out and destroys everything. I also hate this thing more and more of these charts are doing where they have a special thing they did to make theirs perform better and they put it in a different color so it looks even bigger a jump. Whatever their custom scaffold is, it sounds like they wrote some system prompt specific to the benchmark to make it perform better. That is cheating. Stupid. Anyways, this is one of the biggest strengths for Claude, its ability to use tools. If you're not already familiar, this whole agentic thing does have some actual meaning. The core concept is the idea of a tool that an AI can use. Instead of it just spitting out words and giving them to you, a tool is a set of instructions that tell a model, hey, you have this capability. You can look up temperatures from this API, or you can find what the weather is in this area, or you can look through somebody's GitHub repositories using this. It's not actually going to do a fetch call itself. It's not running code, but it is calling a function. It is doing the thing with the tool. It's telling the tool or whatever code you wrote, hey, I want this. And then your code, your tool, your whatever goes and does a web search, hits an API, does whatever it needs to, and then hands the result back to the LLM so it can continue whatever it's doing. Historically, Claude's been really, really good at this, like better than everything else. I don't know if they built it for that. In fact, I'm almost certain they didn't build it for that. But for whatever reason, because Claude was a good model, it handled these cases really well, even better than most thinking models did. I'm not sure how O3 would perform on this benchmark, and they didn't put it in. But from my experience, just playing around with tooling stuff, we're still very slowly rolling it out for T3 chat. Claude has absolutely followed the tools and the expectations of them the best by far, and these numbers don't surprise me. They've gone even farther with it. So if you're building things that are really heavily on these tools and have crazy agentic flows with lots of parts moving around, these small percentage wins can become much bigger. Because if it's wrong 19% of the time instead of 27% of the time, and you do 3 of those calls per thing, let's just do the math. So it's a 3% gap, which means we'll actually use the 81% number, and we'll use that to the power of, let's say you have 4 tools, 0.81 to the power of 4. Then you're down to a 43% accuracy rating if you have that 81% 4 times versus the 73. Now you're down to 30%. And I know that these numbers don't seem big from 81 to 73, but when you're remembering that you run these things multiple times during an agentic flow, these gaps make a much bigger difference. That's like a 50% win once you have 4 or more tools. That's nuts. And as for the rest of the benchmarks, very good. Interesting to see that Grok 3 is performing as well as it is here. We still don't have the API for Grok. And thank you, Claude, for shipping the API immediately. Very kind of you guys. A lot of these companies, and when I say a lot of, I mostly mean Grok, they're not as kind. They don't ship things when they're ready. They ship things when they feel like, which has made it a lot harder to test Grok 3 in meaningful ways. Whereas Claude has all of this stuff just built in, and they had the API ready day 0. Very kind of them. But these numbers, as I said, suspiciously close. Still way higher than other options. It's cool to see O3 Mini. Again, remember how cheap O3 Mini is? Having it be that close and still beat out 3.7 with no thinking, that's a pretty significant thing to see. On one hand, Claude 3.7 is obviously best model available right now for code stuff. But on the other hand, O3 Mini is now even easier to appreciate as such a high quality model. Multilingual Q&A, it's slotted in. Kind of surprised. They've historically not been great at the multilingual stuff. And maybe they were okay at it, but yeah, that's a really good score. Good for them. Following instructions, again, really very much their strength. They're still best in class for that. Math problem solving, not beating out O3 Mini by the looks of it. Hell, they're not even beating out R1. That's kind of crazy. They got slaughtered here. Yeah, O1, O3 Mini, and R1 all destroyed them on math. So if you're doing hard math stuff, use one of those models. They'll be cheaper and better. But high school math, that's funny. This says so much where high school math competitions, if you don't think, you don't reason, you get 20%. But any amount of thinking, suddenly you're in the 80s. And it's the same deal with previous Claude 3.5 being really bad at high school math, whereas O1, O3, and R1 and everything else were pretty good at it. But that's kind of hilarious. It's actually one of the worst scores here for math. So yeah, don't expect Claude 3.7 to be really good at math. It seems like it's really bad at it, actually. Everything else is good. We need to get to Claude Code, but I want to talk about the thinking a bit more because I've been playing with it mostly in T3 chat. But when we were setting it up, I quickly did a test in here, and I asked it a really hard Advent of Code problem. I like using Advent of Code problems as a test because I take it really seriously. I do it every year. I've been using this giant project as like a test bed for all the different models for a bit. The one thing I'll say here is, although it didn't answer anything other models couldn't, it did stop hallucinating weird stuff like window.fs, which isn't a real API. So overall, a win. But man, the thinking on this one was weird. So it starts out with the keypad, like trying to solve the problem. This problem's fun. It's a weird keypad problem where there's a grid that has to have numbers pressed on it, but you don't press it directly. You move your finger up, down, left, right, and click. But then you're not you, you're a robot. And the robot behind you also does the same up, down, left, right, but you have to move a finger to point up, down, left, right, A for that. And there's like 3 layers of that. It's a weird conceptual problem that really throws LLMs. And it threw here. Nothing got either of the parts properly for this one. But what I found interesting here is it did it in TypeScript like I told it to, mostly. But there's a couple points in here, in particular near the end, where it checks its work. Here, yeah. It doesn't give a language tag here, which is very interesting because it hallucinates and does it in Python. I was very surprised by this because this shows that it's probably not hiding its thinking. My immediate assumption was, oh, they trained it recently enough that it has the answers from this year in its training data, so it's using a Python answer to convert over. But then I saw the training dates, or the date cutoff. I guess I don't have it listed here. Forgot where they put it, but the cutoff for training data was October 2024. So it doesn't have that data. So I don't know why it just randomly dove into Python while thinking and then spit out TypeScript code that doesn't solve the problem, but it did do that. Very interesting. Enough of the Claude site though, because there's a much better site for talking to Claude, one that's a good bit less painful. T3 Chat. And obviously I updated T3 Chat to include the new 3.7 models. 3.7 Sonnet and the Sonnet Reasoning are both options now. So now I can pick either Sonnet or Sonnet Reasoning. And when I pick Reasoning, I can pick between low, medium, and high. These aren't settings that are being exposed via the API the traditional way. It's actually something we coded in. So here's how we handle the different reasoning efforts. We're putting in different amounts of reasoning tokens that it's allowed to use out of the full output. Because it can only output up to a certain amount of tokens. We're picking the split between reasoning and not reasoning, or more so letting it think more or less, depending on how much we think it should need to think. Ideally, in the future, this won't be something you have to think about yourself. I mean, the model can think, why can't it think about this, you know? But yeah, it's a hard problem to solve. It's not as simple as just doing it automatically. So for now, we're exposing this. Might change in the future, but that's all it takes. So I'm going to set it on reasoning high. I'm going to paste in everyone's favorite, the Python ball bounce. You get reasoning. We tuck it under this little fold, but you see all the reasoning coming in. And the UI isn't broken on small screens. I've been trying the Claude and ChatGPT sites a lot more. I'm probably going to do a whole video about how broken their UIs are because it's gotten so annoying to me. Let me know if you guys are interested in that. I feel bad just picking on our competition, but it's really bad nowadays. Here, it's still reasoning. One thing I've noticed about the reasoning with Claude is it really likes to spit out the whole program output and then say, or wait, and then do something else. It says it'll rewrite parts, but it usually just rewrites the whole thing every time. It does a ton of tokens during the thinking phases, which if you know anything about how Claude charges, that makes this a lot more expensive. I am not excited to see our bill because even after the changes we made to reduce it, I was going to show it. Yeah, it's not a cheap model. You can see when our changes went in place, but today is going to make it not cheap. It's going to be fun. Anyways, how are we doing on this one? Are we done thinking yet? Response was truncated due to length. Yeah. Rip. Let's bump it to low and try again. I will say I did this earlier, and I did get an answer, and it was a fun one. If we use the Claude 3.7, I did it with and without thinking. So UV, my favorite thing of late, run games Claude 3.7.py. Yep. I think the thinking caused it to perform worse because I've noticed this with thinking models. With certain puzzles, thinking models will gaslight themselves out of solving the problem and do some weird stuff, like with Grok where it would flip it upside down, or here where it just breaks the collision detection entirely and the ball fails. But if we switch this to the not thinking model, it's totally fine. I was amused by this. I thought it was particularly funny that the thinking model got it wrong and the not thinking model got it right. It just intuitively feels wrong, but it kind of shows you how fragile these things are, but it also shows you how powerful Claude 3.7 standard is. So if we take this code here, the stuff that it just put out with the low thinking, we'll see if reducing the amount of thinking will cause it to gaslight itself less. Claude 3.7 low.py. Paste. Look at that. Ta-da. So if you use the low thinking, it actually seems to perform better, which is weird. It's very weird, but it's worth considering. So if you want to save us some money and possibly get some smarter outputs, or you notice it's gaslighting itself a bunch, switch over to low, or maybe switch over to standard 3.7. It's really good. This is not the only place I've been using it. You might have noticed I'm on the newest version of Cursor. I was lucky enough to get early access. It's been awesome. It just shipped today, or at least it's rolling out. So a lot of things different in this version. Let me know if it's interesting enough to do a whole video on that. I've already been thinking about it. But I've been using 3.7 for a bunch of work I've been doing today. It's been nuts. It's a meaningful, noticeable improvement, and it has been solving hard problems. Like I'm in the middle of upending our entire backend for managing the chat messages. I'll check out the branch, show you actual code that I'm working on. So this is a branch I'm working on called Try Never Throw. It's not just Never Throw, it's also a huge overhaul of our entire chat management code. But it is using Never Throw, which is a package that is a very different way of managing things like your type definitions. I have to go npm install to get that. Cool. So instead of throwing when I have an error, I'll instead return error. And when I have something that's okay, I return okay. I haven't started consuming any of the custom async specific stuff for this yet. I've just defined errors and return okay or error from everything. But I'm not doing it with any of the deps on either side of this file. So I have things like the verify shitty fingerprint or the check recapture token. These are external async functions that I am wrapping in this file, but I wanted to use all these new patterns too. And I was surprised when I just told Cursor with 3.7, hey, go implement this across all the other files, and it did it correctly. I actually have the results here where it entirely redid this file first and foremost, changing a lot of the result types, using a lot of async stuff where it wasn't prior, using async from promise for actually checking each step and then doing things so we get a better error type out. And I admittedly, it didn't change the other files initially, even though it was in agent mode, but I told it, hey, you should change these other things too. And it went and did. Now verify shitty fingerprint is an async result that is a fingerprint error or string as its two potential returns. And it seems like it handled all of this totally fine. What really blew me away is I just went and tried and it worked. It didn't break anything, which I was really surprised because a huge overhaul like this normally would break stuff. I do admittedly have in docs here the never throw docs as a source, but I don't even think I tagged it when I told it to do that. I just told it to and it did it correctly. If Cursor was the only way to use this in your code base, that's fine because this is super impressive. Bias admitted, I'm an investor in Cursor. I've been really impressed with them for a while. I was skeptical at first and they've blown me away, but they're not the only way anymore. That's one of the coolest things about this release. I've been talking about it on the side for a bunch. It's Claude Code. Wait, I forgot one more benchmark. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But this is one of my favorite things they did here. It's the extended thinking blog post where they talk about how the thinking is not a different model. It's a mode for the model. But they had a lot of cool stuff in here. In particular, one of my new favorite benchmarks, Claude models playing Pokemon. This is different Claude models trying to get through Pokemon Red. How far can they get before they lose or give up? And what was crazy is it made it all the way to Surge's badge, which is a lot farther than the previous models did. I have to shout out this Amanda tweet. Two things happened. Claude got an upgrade, and AGI was finally officially defined as whatever model can catch Mewtwo. I just thought that was really good. I had to include it. Okay, with all of that out of the way, we need to talk about Claude Code. Because Claude Code is a very different thing. It's an idea that I've had in the past, but I'm sure I'm not the only one. Instead of using your IDE or a website to interface with your code, what if you just use a CLI? So if I stash this again, I'm going to go to main, do a fresh install, let's make sure everything's good. Now I'm going to tell it to do something. Let's tell it to refactor that same stuff I was working on. You know what? I'll make it a little fairer. We're going to check out Theo start refactor chat API. So this is the branch I was working on prior for the refactor before I introduced never throw. Let's see how Claude does. I already installed it, so it's just Claude. Now I can tell it to do something. Let's tell it to move over the... God. So let's figure out where those files are so I can give it the fairest chance. So it's all in backend chat. So I can start with process request. Let's just tell it to go there. Overhaul the code in source, backend chat. process request TS and all of its imports. I'll say, and the functions it imports to use, never throw. Let's see how it does. First is asking if I'm okay with it grepping package JSON. I'll tell it to not ask for grep in the future. Do I want to install it? No, because I don't want to use npm. Come on, use pnpm. There we go. This is an interesting interface. It's going through all the right files. Kind of crazy they got the little icon working in the terminal too. I'll admit when I'm impressed. CLIs of that quality are hard. Claude's UI has always been beautiful. The website's quite buggy and has a lot of weird cases, but it's always looked pretty good. So seeing them pull that off in the CLI is nice. I'd have more padding on the left, but nothing could be perfect, you know? I am a little scared about how much it's thinking because this isn't part of like the standard Claude account. This is going through the API, which means each second is costing me money right now. God, that's the problem I have with Claude is I feel my bill growing every token that comes in because it is just that expensive. I really hope they take the opportunity to reduce the price on 3.5. I don't think they will, but I really hope they do. Okay, it's taking a minute. So while we wait, oh wait, no, right when I said that, it finished, of course. So here it's showing us what it's going to change. Import, okay, a result from never throw. Switching all of this code over. Cool. Make this edit to process request. Okay, that I said the UI would get jank. There is the jank. When I'm going up and down, it's scrolling up and down. Let's let it edit the files. I want to find the changes they made to rejections. We'll get there in a sec. I want to run this quick. Do I want to make these edits to verify? Sure. Go nuts. We listened to your feedback with Claude 3.7 Sonnet. We've reduced unnecessary refusals by 45% compared to the predecessor. This is a funny example. I'm not going to say the words out loud because YouTube might demonetize us, but it asked about mixing certain things and it would not tell you what happens, but now it will tell you what actually happens because it knows you're not trying to be malicious when you ask that way. Good changes. I want to change that? Sure. Okay, now that I'm doing a heavier thing with this, it seems quite a bit slower than doing it with Claude. A lot of that's just because it doesn't have the context yet, so I had to build it. They should show the definition of the word here if they're going to use weird ones, so I can at least learn something while I'm sitting here waiting. Title, sure. I'm increasingly unsure of how useful this tool will be to people in real life now that I'm seeing how weirdly slow it is to do a task like this. Admittedly, it's a hard task. Like I was working on this for hours last night doing the move. Just a lot of it was learning the new library, to be fair, but this wasn't a trivial task. I've had a couple of things recently where AI just didn't help a lot. Like I built a real funny service for myself, Page Me, as a pager so that people who I trust can sign in, type in the name of a new model and hit Page Theo and it will call me. And while one of the site generators got me a little bit of the way, it didn't get me very far and I just had to yank the code and go do it myself. It was a lot of work, but it's done and it works well. But yeah, the AI tools did not help a whole lot there. I want to make this edit to stream text. Sure. This should be the last one. That route is where the code goes out. So hopefully after this one, we'll finally have a result. Edit route. Sure. This is going to cost like $8 to $10 just by itself. I'm going to make these changes to verify request. Sure. Yeah. Cursor is still the move, it seems. I want to make this edit. It wants to run the type check. Sure. No content. Good sign. No type errors. I'm so curious to see if this works. Let's try it. PNPM. It already installed. Just make sure. PNPM run dev. Using Vivaldi as my dev browser because I'm just tired of fighting Firefox's dev tools. Testing. Holy shit. It just worked. That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. I was not sure if that code change would just work like this, and it totally did. So let's close this. Oh, it wasn't too bad. It was only 73 cents for all that work. It took a while, but it was only 73 cents to do the work. It's still $1 for one prompt, but not as bad. Let's make this a new branch so we can actually look at the code on GitHub quickly. Oh, a little dev pro tip for those who are like me. If you haven't tried LazyGit, I don't use much of its functionality, but I use this a lot. LG, 3 to switch to the branch, O to open a PR. And it is significantly faster than doing the same thing on other tools, like doing it with the GitHub CLI, for example. So I use that for opening most of my PRs. So if we base this on that other branch, let's see what the diff looks like. Parse results, safe parse result data, all looking good so far. The verified result is error. Then we handle the error and we return different status codes depending on what type of error it was, because we know the different error types now because they're all type safe with this package. Really cool. I don't love how the word wrap is happening there. I don't know if that's because my browser is there. Okay, yeah, it didn't use prettier formatting at all by the looks of it. So like if I MPX prettier right, okay, it hit the PNPM lock, which it shouldn't have, but it did change all of the files that got hit there too. It also did shadcn stuff, which I'll fix later. But you get the idea. It did not prettier format those files at all. A bit annoying, but all the code looks pretty solid. This is the route, right? Cool. Yeah, I wouldn't return responses anywhere but the route. I would return other things where it makes more sense to. Here we have my count tokens, returns okay or error on the catch there. All makes sense. Model offline handled, chat API error handled. This is looking good so far. Promise result, void error, user await check off. Yeah. This all seems good. I'm impressed. I spent a lot of time on this code earlier. I didn't realize 3.7 would come out the next day and be able to do most of it for me. That's annoying. That's annoying. It's cool, but it's annoying. Yeah, I'm impressed. It is the model I will be using in Cursor going forward. It's the model I'll be using on T3 chat when I have hard enough problems that it makes sense. I'll be honest that my defaults still stay in Gemini. I just like the speed so much. It's so fast, guys. It's really good. But Claude 3.7, even the non-reasoning one, just standard 3.7, it's so good that it's probably just going to become my default going forward. I'm really impressed with it. I've had a great time using it. It's solving actual problems for me. It's doing real production grade work for me. It's the workhorse model. I think that's what they were going for. They built the model everyone loves to use for their code and for their work, and they're holding strong. But God, do I hope they lower the price already. It's insane that it's still as expensive as it is. For the thinking model, I get it, but for the general, like, come on. It's getting harder and harder to justify that $8 price point that we have in T3 chat. But if you do want to go try the model out and you want to support us a bit, give it a shot at t3.chat. $8 a month for access to this model is a pretty good deal, in my opinion. I don't know what else to say. Let me know what you guys think. Until next time, peace, nerds.